Check, check. Mic check for stream. Testing.
Okay, I have 9:26, so I think it's about time we get started here. Just welcome to everybody to the Family History Fair. My name is John Horan. I'm the oral historian here at the State Archives of North Carolina, and I'll be guiding you through this process today. First, I'd like to thank everybody who helped put this together, particularly Danielle Sharilla with the State Archives and Taylor Wolford with the State Library, along with many, many others. And thank you all for coming to learn more about researching African American genealogy here with the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So this event is sponsored by the Friends of the Archives, The Friends of the Archives is a nonprofit organization that privately funds some of the services, activities, and programs of the State Archives of North Carolina, including preservation efforts, digitization projects, and our paid internship program. Connect with the Friends of the Archives by visiting foanc.org or visiting the Friends at their table on this floor next to the elevator on this side, I believe. Speaking of the archives, the State Archives houses, to our closest estimate, over 100 million documents and audio-visual materials related to North Carolina's history, covering 3.5 centuries. The Archives collects and preserves the records generated by government agencies, as well as donations from private citizens and organizations. Researchers can visit the headquarters here in Raleigh, here in this building, as a matter of fact, upstairs on the second floor until 1 p.m., or regional branches in Manteo and Asheville 5 days a week. Our staff works hard to manage these collections, facilitate research, and organize events like these to bring North Carolina's history to all the people. Now, a little bit more on the State Library. The Government and Heritage Library, part of the State Library of North Carolina, connects North Carolina residents with the state's history, culture, and government information. The GHL serves as the official repository for state publications and offers many resources for genealogy and local history research, including access to Ancestry.com and historical newspaper databases. The GHL also provides expert research help, access to digital collections, and supports engaging educational and outreach programs. The Government and Heritage Library is open today until 1 p.m., and we invite visitors to stop by, chat with library staff, and sign up for a library card. Please note that the library cards are available only to North Carolina residents and state employees. We look forward to helping you explore the many resources that the library has to offer. So as you registered, you should have gotten a schedule of events. I'd like to remind everyone that the sessions will be in this auditorium. Vendors will be out in the lobby until 1. At this point, I'd also like to say that the building closes promptly at 1, so please make sure you have all of your belongings and are ready to go before that point. That being said, at noon, we'll meet at Freedom Park for a talk with Khadijah McNair. And by way of introduction on that, Freedom Park is the first physical space that the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission oversees. The mission of the Heritage Commission is to preserve, protect, and promote North Carolina African American history, art, and culture for all the people. They are a small team, and their work is broad. Learn more today at noon. First up, we have Renate Yarborough Sanders. Renate Yarborough Sanders is an experienced genealogist and educator who descends from North Carolinians who are formerly enslaved, enslavers, and free people of color. Renate authors 2 blogs and a funeral program database. She also belongs to many genealogical organizations and co-hosts the online platform Let's Talk About North Carolina Genealogy. And with that, would you like to come up?
Good morning. Give me just a second to get myself situated. It's good to see you. Okay. Where's that? Oh, we need that. Okay. Well, it's very good to be here in what I should call my home state, even though I wasn't born here. As John said, all of my ancestry is North Carolina on both sides of my family. I live in Virginia, but my maternal side did not come to Virginia or move to Virginia until right at the turn of the 20th century. So all the research that I do is, for my personal, is North Carolina research. I'm gonna get started because this presentation is long, and it's gonna take the full amount of the time that I've been allotted, and I do wanna try to finish in time for us to do, a few questions and answers. So bear with me if I'm talking kind of fast, especially through the first few slides, I may talk fast. Can I just ask, who in here, if anyone, is an absolute beginner at doing genealogy research? Can you raise your hand for me? Oh, okay, so that's why I have the first few slides in here. So if you've been doing this for a while, you may, oh, that's cute, you can see it up there too. Sorry. I don't think they had that last time I talked here. That's really cute. You'll need these first few slides. I did find out this morning that this is being recorded and that it's gonna be available on YouTube, and I didn't know any of that. So I would ask that you not take pictures of the slides since you'll have access to it, but there might be a couple of slides where I'll say you might want to take a picture of this and go right ahead. Okay, so my objective today is to give an introductory overview of some of the methodology and resources for researching ancestors of color in North Carolina. So these are the slides that are for the beginners. Researching our ancestors of color begins just like everybody's genealogy research. You start out with what you know. The key is that you have to really do like a dig into your brain, and everything you know now needs to either go down on paper, or if you're doing electronic notebook or note-taking, however you want to take your notes, it's time to spill everything you know about your family onto that or into that. So start with yourself and then work your way backwards. So yourself, your parents, their parents, which are your grandparents, and so on. Maybe you know someone's first name, but you don't know their last name. Maybe you've heard a nickname, but you don't know their real name. Stop it, phone. Sorry. And that's Dr. Shelley Murphy. She knows I'm speaking right now. Whatever you know, I always suggest starting with a pedigree chart. Now, a pedigree chart is your direct line of ancestry. It does not include aunts, uncles, cousins, and all of that. All that goes on your family tree. And I did see that Desi Campbell, right outside this door, has pedigree charts that you can grab if you'd like. So after you've done that, start interviewing your family members. Now, these are all precursors to what I know you want to do. You want to sit on the computer and start looking at Ancestry and Family Search and finding these records. Don't do that first. Do these things first, because it's setting you up for success when you start going into those databases. So interview the family members. Try to start with your elders if you can. And use audio or video recording, because all of us have one of these, right? That's all it takes. You no longer need any fancy equipment or, handheld recorders and things like that that I had to use at the beginning in the 90s when I got started. Pay close attention to any oral history that a family member shares with you, but please know it might not be true. But those stories do always have like a grain of truth, and it's going to be up to you as the researcher to distinguish between what part of the story was true and what was not. And then, this is when you lucky people who are just starting out get to stay at home in your pajamas and use all the free online resources that have well, let me not give a false image. Not all the documents are online, but these ones that you need to get started, that I used to travel here to the State Archives in Raleigh, or to Franklin County Courthouse, or to Tyrrell County, or to Warren County from Virginia when I wanted to do it. You don't have to do that anymore. These early records are available to you online, so get everything you can do done at home so you'll be ready when it's time to travel. Start building now, not just a tree, not just a pedigree chart, but an actual database of records that you'll be able to attach to your ancestors. And then you should also be creating timelines. Now, some of the programs that you can use will create a timeline for you if you put everything in them. But if you don't, then I just use a Word document, but some people use charts and tables and Excel, which I can't stand, to keep their timelines. So you do what works for you. I spent too long on that slide. Okay, I'm nervous about the time. All right, so getting started, and again, this is for everyone, really involves a focus on vital records. Those would be birth, marriage, and death records, and then I like to include some particular military records that you'll see. So here in North Carolina, statewide registration of births and deaths began in 1913, but it wasn't fully implemented in every county or in every instance until around 1920. But you should start to see your ancestors or, parents, depending on who we are and how old we are, in those years with birth records, and you should start to see death records. Now, in Wilmington and Raleigh, right where we are, there are earlier records. Some go to 1906, some go into the 1890s. So you'll just have to judge that by where your research is. Marriage records here in North Carolina have been kept publicly since 1742 in a few different formats. But it wasn't until 1868 that an act in the North Carolina General Assembly transferred the power to issue marriage licenses to the Register of Deeds for each county. And it made this the only formal public record of marriages. Now, I kind of have a little dispute with that because of one of the records we're going to look at when we start talking about slavery. I'll mention that then. But statewide, 1868 is when you begin to see formal marriage records like this one here, where you can have the application at the top for the license, and you get all the juicy information like the names and ages of the people getting married, their parents' names, where their parents are from, whether their parents are alive or deceased at the time they're making this application. And then down at the bottom, you get the actual license signed by the clergy or the justice of the peace or whoever married them, and it tells you who that is, where they got married, who were their witnesses, all that juicy information. And so these, along with death certificates, can also usually get you back one more generation if you find them. And then I like to talk about 20th century military records, specifically draft registrations. And so this example that I have here is for my second great-grandfather's youngest brother, or only brother actually, William Adam Green. They were from Lewisburg, and then he lived here, right across the street here, in Raleigh. But this was when he had moved to New York, and you can see that I get his address, and I get his age, and I get his date of birth, and this information is presumably coming from him. And that was good because I'd seen a few different years for his date of birth. You find out his occupation, you find out who he worked for, and you find out his nearest relative. And this was helpful to me in confirming his wife's name. That's not her maiden name, but it helped me get a name for her. Then you get a little description over here, medium height, medium build, gray eyes, and the color of his hair, brown. Well, why is this important? This is important because of that right there. It says white. When I started doing my research, and I was pointed to some elders in my family that I'd never met before who were on my green line, they told me about a segment of our family that moved to New York and were passing as white. I had never heard of these people. William Green, his sibling, I didn't know anything when I started my research. So this was a confirmation of that oral history that was passed down to me that this man was passing as white. And I've found other documents that corroborate that. But sometimes he's Indian, and one time he's Italian, so he was just picking and choosing as he went along. Now, I want you to notice that the corners are intact on this document. That is because our military was still segregated, all except the Navy. And what they would do is when you come in to register, if you're white or white presenting, or you say you're white, you go in this pile with your corners intact. But if you're black, look at those corners. They cut them off, and they go over here in this pile. And so that made it that they were able to start the separation, you know, right there at the table or whatever where you registered. So this is another ancestor of mine, Willie Arthur Ross. He was from Elam's, where my Ross family still lives. Didn't know them either. That's in Warren County, North Carolina. You see, again, I have his birth date, and, you know, he's a natural-born citizen. It seems kind of like he's a little radical. He's making it clear, because then for his race, he says African. So he's making sure of it. And, of course, his corners are cut off. Now, I also learned from this that he was single, and his mother was his nearest relative. He didn't give her name. And he tells that his mother was solely dependent on him. Just recently, my cousin Carolyn Ross was telling me about him, and she was telling me a story that I'm not going to repeat here because it's not a good story, about him during the time he was caring for his mother. And so now that I see this, I'm like, okay, she was right. He was caring for his mother, you know. And then you have his description on the other side. Okay, so those are your beginning documents. Say beginning documents. All right. See, people want to skip that. You know, they want to start digging in online, and you've got all the wrong people because you didn't take the time with these vital records that help you see who is who and who's related to who and where they lived and what they said their ages were and all of that. So you got to take time with that first. Then you get ready to be a researcher, as you want to call it, and get into some other documents. So as you approach the other documents, please make sure of everything you see on every document. Read every single word, scribble, scratch, look at the pictures people draw when they're bored. On every document, top to bottom, side to side, corner to corner. Pay attention to every name on each document, especially names of witnesses, bondsmen, whoever those people are. They are part of your ancestors' fan club. And this is a term coined by Elizabeth Shown Mills that stands for friends, associates, and neighbors. When you see these people, you need to do a little research on them. Sometimes you find out they're in your family. Sometimes you find out it's the next door neighbor, and if you research them, you might find information about your family. So make sure you do that. You also, as you approach the document, need to be sure you understand the laws of the time and of the place. I should have that on there. So the three main categories that matter to us would be property laws, laws of coverture, and any laws related to slavery or those black codes that came out just before and after slavery. So property laws, why do they matter? Because our enslaved ancestors were chattel property. Laws of coverture, those are laws related to women owning property, which is going to really make a difference when you're looking at an enslaved ancestor who maybe becomes a widow or comes into a marriage with property that she's inherited from her father. So you have to know those laws, and then the last one's self-explanatory. All right, so here we go. The first place people like to go once you've graduated from those birth, death, marriage, and late military records is into the census. Now, you're going to always be coming back to those vital records because now you're going to want to corroborate what you see in the next set of records with what you saw in the vital records. So people like to start with the census. It's a great place to start. The United States federal census is what I'm talking about, but you need to check to see if the state of North Carolina, since everybody's here from North Carolina, had any state censuses, or if your county had any county censuses, or if the Freedmen's Bureau, which we'll talk about in a minute, took any censuses during Reconstruction. So check, the place that you are researching. But the United States federal census was enumerated every 10 years and has been since 1790. And our people, everybody's people, have been in every single census since 1790. Did you know that? Yeah, some people. Okay, so the reason I tell you that is because even though from 1790 till 1840 censuses, only the head of household was named, everybody else was a tick mark in a category based on their race, their status as free or enslaved, or their age range. So we're all on there. You just don't know who we are, okay? Then, I'm not gonna go, we'll talk about the rest of that in a minute. Okay, know that there are different questions on the census every year. So you need to really study, see what was asked, what was answered, and keep making notes and keep comparing it to what you saw in your vital records, and keep adding people to your tree, because as you go back, you're gonna get more people. And then study the directions, the instructions that were given to the enumerators. You can do that on a website called census.gov. You can go to every decennial enumeration and actually read the instructions. That's going to help you understand why questions were asked the way they were, why they were answered the way they were, why the answers were recorded the way they were, and then the times when the census takers had certain incentive to make sure a certain question got answered, whether it was true or not true. So make sure you check out those instructions. So you're working with the census record, you want to work backwards to build your family tree out and to include new information on your timelines. We have most recently the 1950 census. Censuses are released 72 years after they're enumerated. So we got the 1950 in 2022. So that's where you can start. Use every enumeration to update your tree, and you're gonna keep hearing me say, go back and update the pedigree chart, the tree, the timeline, all those things that you started with, and always compare the information and work out any inconsistencies. Be sure you notate all the new information, because remember, there are different questions from each census. And then study the neighborhood around your target ancestor to look for other relatives either that you know about or that you suspect could be, because maybe they have the same surname or they have a different surname, but some of the people in the house have the same first names as your family, because they could have all been named after the same grandmothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever. All right, time for me to take a little sit break. Hold on, because I'm not sure about this stool. All right, John, where are you? Is he in here? I made it. Okay, all right. So also, as I have already mentioned, be prepared for any contradictions between what you're seeing in the census and what you already thought because you saw it on a birth certificate or a death certificate. And you have to know that, like certain documents, you know that the person themselves is giving that information. But other documents, someone else is giving the information, so decide which document is more to be trusted more. So you work your way backwards from 1950, 1940, 1930, all the way back, 1910, 2010, 1900, 1890 has a line through it. Why is that? Great. It got burned in a fire in 1921. So only a few fragments have survived to represent, I have been saying 4,000, but I saw something a couple of weeks ago that said 6,000, so I need to check my number, but only a few thousand people out of the entire United States. But guess what? North Carolina has 2 counties that have surviving fragments from the census, 1890. Cleveland County and Gaston. So if you have relatives there, check and see if they made it into the fragments. And then we get to 1870, which is where we now kind of shift to talk about what's different about African American genealogy research. So 1870 has this awful reputation as a brick wall year for African American research. And it's because it is the first, well, I don't believe in that, so we're getting rid of that. But the 1870 census is particularly significant for us because it's the first federal census taken after emancipation. And it's the first time that all people of color are being named. So remember, I told you we've been there. We've been tick marks. We've even been on slave schedules, but we haven't been named. So you want to use the 1870 census to try to establish baseline data about those ancestors that you picked up as you were coming backwards. And now you want to make a sure note about everything they're saying or everything that was recorded about their age, what their name is, where they lived, who's in the household with them, what kind of work they were doing, all of that, because it's going to help you as you continue to look for them during enslavement. Also study the neighborhood. We call this cluster research. I mentioned this already, to look for family members. And all of this I already mentioned, the surnames, the forenames. But I also want to let you know the formerly enslaved did not always take the surname of their last enslaver. That's a myth if you believe that, because more often than not, they didn't take the surname of the last enslaver. What I have noticed, though, is in early records after emancipation, you might get a hint to a last enslaver because that ancestor may be on a record where they are asked for a last name and they haven't picked one yet. And so they will be asked, well, who owns you? And they'll say, Mr. Yarborough. So they'll put that on the document as Yarborough, but then you see them in 1880 with a different name because the family has they could take whatever name they wanted to, and the family has made a different decision. So just, sometimes it's a hint, sometimes it's real. Also, look for your ancestors in the 1860 and 1850 censuses because those were the first two enumerations where every free person in the household was named. So if a free person of color was a head of household, they've been in the census since 1790. But now, all free people are being named. And so you may find out that your ancestral family were free before the Civil War. If you don't find them in 1850 or 1860, then the likelihood increases that they were enslaved. And so now you have a decision to make. You come to what I call not a brick wall, but the 1870 fork in the road. So what do? Either you're going to be researching ancestors that you believe to have been enslaved. Maybe you don't know yet. Maybe you do know because your family, had the oral history. But I'm telling you, I didn't know anything. So this is what I had to do. So either you haven't found them anywhere before that 1870 census, so you're going towards them as though they may have been enslaved, or you did find them in records, either census or other records before 1865, and you know them to be free. It's two totally different kinds of research. So this is an example from my own family history. I see these bottles of water down here. I'm going to grab one. They gave me one, but I'm using that to hold the plug into my computer. Okay, so what you're looking at, these are a set of my third great-grandparents. Okay, thank you. Everett and Minerva Ross in Warren County, North Carolina. And this was the first time I'd seen them on any records once I found out about that I had any ancestors named Everett and Minerva Ross. And I was able to learn, their ages and what they were doing for work, and that he owned $20 worth of personal property, but no real estate or land. I saw Minerva, and then on the line under Minerva is my second great-grandmother, who was 15 years old, Lavinia. And I'm lucky to have this as a screenshot because they're at the very bottom of the census page. If your ancestors are at the bottom of the page, turn the page because the rest of the family could be on the next page, okay? So this is not the whole family, but for purposes of my presentation, it gives me 2 generations of my direct ancestry to show you. But first time I've seen them, so which way am I gonna go? I'm gonna go in the direction of researching ancestors that I believe to have been enslaved. Now, along the way, I might find out that they weren't, but I've gotta, do the work. So, the way I'm gonna present this to you today is kind of the old way, which is to first try to identify an enslaver. But I'm gonna get to a set of records in a few minutes I'm gonna encourage you to maybe try a different way. So when I started with my Yarborough line. I learned I had this grandfather, Calvin, great-grandfather, also Calvin Yarborough, and I didn't know anything about any of them, and I didn't know why we had the Yarborough name. So that meant I'm gonna look for a Yarborough enslaver because I didn't know any better. So the approach was to go to the United States Federal Slave Schedules, which were enumerated in 1850 and 1860 as Part 2, Schedule 2 of the federal census. And they're right in Franklin County, North Carolina, and I'm looking for Yarborough enslavers in Franklin County because I didn't know anything else. And I'm using the baseline data from the 1870 that tells me that Calvin would have been about, he says he was 30 in 1870, so he would have been about 20 on the 1860 and about 10 years old on the 1850, okay? That's what I had to do. You don't have to do it that way anymore, but I'm letting you know. So on the federal slave schedules, you do not have names of enslaved people. You only have the names of the enslavers and then a description of each enslaved person that describes them by their gender, their age, and their color, which is either going to be black or mulatto. In 1860, they were asked, not mandated, but asked, to put the names of anyone 100 years or older, so you might see them. And then there are about 10 locations around the country where the enumerators did not follow instructions, and they actually wrote in the names of the enslaved people. So again, you may get lucky. Maybe one of those would be your ancestor. Also on these documents, they were asked whether they were a fugitive from the state, which is a runaway, whether someone had been manumitted within the past year, and whether they had a disability. In 1860, they added a question about the number of slave houses owned by the enslaver. So this is an example of what a federal slave schedule would look like. This one is from 1860. I usually spend some time on this, but I pulled the animations for the sake of time, but I will just point out that you see the names of the enslavers, the information about the enslaved, and the information about how many slave houses. Please don't believe when you're watching TV and those wonderful TV shows that we love about genealogy, the host says, there's your ancestor right there on that line. You can't do that. The only way you can do that is if you have a document that was dated at the same time that spells out your ancestor's name and age, and it matches exactly what you see on this census from June 1st of 1860. No matter what day they came, the information had to be about what was true on June 1st. You can use it when you're initially looking for an enslaver to help narrow down who might have owned your ancestor, or to totally eliminate them if, the person, your ancestor was female, they didn't have any females. But remember, they could have sold them on May 31st or purchased them on June 2nd. This is only about what was true on June 1st. So only use slave schedules to support or challenge your findings on other documents. I don't know what's going on there. And I'm not going to talk about that. I need to save time. Okay. So the next thing is to use estate records. So this is, you've narrowed down the people using the slave schedule who you think potentially could have owned your ancestor. So now you have to research those people. These are the white people. You have to research the white people. And you have to research their whole families because transactions happen between family members that included our ancestors. So the main documents within estate records that you're going to be looking for will be inventories, wills, bills of sale, division of property, and sales and counts. So this is an example from the estate of Woodleaf Hooper in Caswell County, North Carolina. And this is an example of an inventory sort of and a division also. But I'm focused right here on what is a listing of his enslaved property and their values, okay? Easy on the eyes to look for something that lists names when you're looking for an inventory. But I want you to be careful about that, because here when you look at the property of Leonidas Neal from Franklin County, North Carolina, your eyes are going to go to this list, but you're looking at longhorn and fodder and shucks and cotton and hogs, and you might turn the page and say, okay, we're no enslaved people on that page. But remember, our enslaved ancestors are going to be listed right along with those hogs and cattle, and if you had turned the page, you would have missed this 31 Negroes of the following names: Abram, Bob, Moses, Benjamin, Margaret, Caroline, and so on. So again, that's why I say read everything top to bottom, side to side, corner to corner. Don't miss anything. I'm used to my mic being on the right, so I'm going to keep hitting this thing. Okay. All right. So also wills. Now, does anybody know this building? Because I know some of you are local. Okay. This is Casein Plantation. It's right in Franklin County. If you go up 401 to where that little Franklin County airport is, it's the next turn to the right, and there's a long road that's like, to me it seems like it's 10 miles long, but it's probably, you know, a mile long that you have to go to get to this house. But my great-grandfather was enslaved here by the daughter of Perry. Now, I can't think of his first name. Anyway, by her Perry's daughter. Say it? Jeremiah. It's Jeremiah. By Jeremiah Perry's daughter. So that was his first enslaver, and there's a whole long story that goes with that. If any of you have a subscription to Legacy Family Tree webinars, a lot of these things that I'm mentioning, you can go there and hear my webinars that talk all about, extensively about these tiny little things that I'm mentioning. But this is the will of Chloe Crudup Perry Neal. And in her will, she names my great-grandfather right there where the yellow box is. And it says, I give to my brother Willie Perry the following property: 3 Negroes, namely Sim the carpenter, Bob, and Calvin. And also my carriage horses, right there with it. So this is one of the earliest mentions of my great-grandfather Calvin, although I do have one mention prior to this. So read wills carefully, read all the paragraphs, you know, use AI to help you transcribe them, but you've got to double check the AI because it makes a lot of mistakes. I took this picture many years ago when I first found out about my Calvin's connection to this plantation. This is the big house, but to the left of this, you can't see it. What you do see is the smokehouse right there. To the left of this, there's a smaller house, which was the original Casein building that was built in the 1700s, and then they built this one in the 1830s. All right, you will also find in estate records, you will also find bills of sale. And again, these are very painful documents sometimes for us to have to, you know, absorb into our thinking, but this is where our ancestors were. If they were enslaved, this is how you find them. So this bill of sale is from Virginia. I decided to keep this one in because it helps me to make my points. You can see that this is from Richmond in January of 1854. For $650, the receipt is in the estate file, okay? For $650, Joseph Anderson has purchased Martha and her child named Edward. So again, this is genealogy. This is a mother and a son. Maybe you know about Edward, but you didn't know about Martha. Maybe you knew about Martha, and you knew she had a son, but you didn't know what his name is. Maybe you knew about both of them, and now you're finding out how they got to Richmond, You see what I'm saying? And it's interesting, the reason I like to keep this one is because they're supposed to be warranted, sound, and healthy. And so he says here that they're both warranted, sound, and healthy, except Martha, who has asthma, like I do. Therefore, she's not sound or healthy. She's not warranted to be sound or healthy. So I always think that's just interesting to look at. And then notice you have 3 witnesses. You're going to want to find out who they are, too, because they may know where your ancestors are. And then I combined 2 slides here. I used to do a separate slide about sales and accounts and show you what happened to my family in Warren County. But instead, I'm showing you here, and I'm sorry, I've got a little, oh, it's the same slide. I just did this morning. Okay, so I put the 2 slides together. So first we had the bill of sale, and now we're looking at sales and accounts, which is also part of the probate papers showing what happened to the estate. And so in this example, I thought this was kind of interesting that there was payment from the estate for searching for a record to find Peter's bill of sale, Peter Hardy's bill of sale for the Negro boy York. So it looks like they may or may not have found it. Like, it doesn't say whether they found it, but they had to, the estate had to pay someone, you know, to go into the courthouse probably or the Register of Deeds and look for that record. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but always look at the sales and accounts. It can help you in so many ways. Runaway slave ads, very painful to read sometimes, but they do help you to get a description if it happens to be your ancestor who had the wherewithal to self-emancipate or to at least try to. You can get a description of an ancestor that you've never seen a picture of. I've never seen a picture of any of my previously enslaved ancestors, or the only one, I think, of the free ones from before 1865. Also, you can get a sense of their personality sometimes. You know, they'll tell you, you know, they have a downcast look, or you might find out someone stutters when when they speak or something like that. So these can be very helpful. Church records. This is also a place for finding records of our enslaved ancestors. And I'm not talking about black churches. I'm talking about the churches of the enslavers, like this one, this beautiful church. I also took this picture, which is in Lewisburg, North Carolina, St. Paul's Episcopal Church, that has tons of records about my enslaved ancestors. And not only my enslaved ancestors from Lewisburg, but others who came there from Somerset in Washington County, North Carolina. Now, church records will help you find births and deaths for your enslaved ancestors and free people of color. Some of them went there too. Declarations of faith, baptisms, burials, information about character breaches, which then led to expulsions from the church, because the enslaved ancestors who were members of the church had to agree to the church resolutions regarding their behavior. And if they didn't behave the way they were supposed to be, then just like the white people, they could be expelled from the church or dismissed from the church. Wonderful, wonderful records. You also will find the name of the enslaver, because these people are going to be identified by or with the name of their enslaver. And remember, this is what you want, because that's who has the records about your ancestor during enslavement. So here's an example from Warren County, North Carolina. This is, I'm not going to read it, but it's showing several enslaved people being baptized, and in each case, it tells who they belong to, so you get the name of the enslaver. You can go back on the YouTube and read that. And then this is, I mentioned my ancestors from Washington County, nowhere near Lewisburg, but their owner, Josiah, and this is just a coincidence that their owner, Josiah, brought them to the county where my paternal ancestors were, because these are my maternal ancestors. But he owned Somerset Plantation, I think the 3rd largest plantation in North Carolina, and he moved just short of 300 of his enslaved inland during the war, because the area that they were in had become occupied by the Union Army, or was, it had already happened. So he moved them inland to a property he had, an undeveloped property in Franklin County. called Hurry Scurry. And while they were there, because he was a religious man, he connected with St. Paul's Episcopal Church in the town of Lewisburg. So there are tons of records from Eatonton and from Washington County, church records from there. He had a chapel on his plantation, and there are registry books from there, so I already have that. But when he moved them to Lewisburg and affiliated them with St. Paul's there, St. Paul started putting records of the enslaved. These are mixed right in with the white people. These are white people where you see all those names and extra information. Those are white people. But the list that you see says servants of the late Josiah Collins, because not only did some of his enslaved pass away during the 3 years that they were there, but Josiah Collins also passed away. He passed away in Hillsborough at another one of his properties. So his wife was the one left with the ownership of these enslaved. But they are named, and where you see the blue dots, those are my ancestors. And they're buried in Franklin County. So it tells you their name, it tells you the date they died, it tells you where they're buried, and but nobody knows where Hurry Scurry was. They know a general area, but they don't know where yet, or they might not ever know. And it tells you the clergy that officiated their burial, right here. And that's the white clergy from St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Took too long on that. Okay, so we also have slavery-era insurance policies. Did you know our enslaved ancestors who were chattel property could be insured, like your home, your car, your diamonds? They could, and they were. And so now there is kind of a movement happening where states are requiring their insurance companies to see if they have records that go back to when slavery existed, and to provide that information about insurance policies held by slave owners for the death or damage to their enslaved property. So you could find your enslaved ancestors here. We can find information about our enslaver ancestors here. Most of us have both, okay? But if you're a descendant, a white descendant of an enslaver, this is important information for you also, because you see the first two, they had policies for their own life, and it tells you what they died of. So you may not have that information because there weren't death certificates yet. And then where you see just first names, those are enslaved people that the policyholder got paid out for when they passed away, and you can see what they died of. Okay, now this is where I told you I was going to tell you about a little switcheroo. Sometimes now, I suggest that instead of starting out looking for the enslaver, that you start out, I'm way behind on time, just so y'all know, but you start out with some post-emancipation, Reconstruction era records that didn't used to be as readily available to us as they are now. And so we're going to look at what a few of those are. And the reason for that is sometimes they will point you back to where your ancestor was during enslavement, and you don't have to do all the work I just showed you to try to figure it out. So we're going to look at a few, and I'm going to start talking real fast. So the first thing I like to talk about are cohabitation records. This is why I said earlier that I didn't really agree with the statement that there's no formal record of marriages in North Carolina until 1868. And that's because in 1866, the North Carolina General Assembly ordered that marriages that we kind of call them quasi-marital relationships that our ancestors were already in, living like husband and wife. They had had marriage ceremonies, some of them jumped the broom, some of them just started living together, but they considered each other husband and wife. Those marriages were not legal. And at emancipation, they had to be legitimized for a lot of reasons that I can't go into right now. So North Carolina General Assembly ordered that this start in March 1866. The Freedmen's Bureau was already doing this under a national order from the War Department, but in North Carolina, the Freedmen's Bureau records of marriages are not as plentiful as they are in some other states. Now, in North Carolina, these were to be recorded by the county clerk, and the county clerk had incentive because they were to be paid 25 cents for each record that they created. So they're going to do it. And what I have found is I think they were going out into the neighborhoods, because when I see the cohabitation records, at least in the counties I do, it's not to me like people were coming into the Register of Deeds office at random times. You see the same family members who lived one after the other, you see them in the records that way. So I think they're like, I'm gonna get my 25 cents, I'm going out, you know, or they sent a deputy out or something. The records, we're so fortunate in North Carolina. We have 100 counties, and these records are extant for 55 of the North Carolina counties. The format will vary by the county. So the one you're looking at right now, you probably have already read it, is for my great-grandparents, Calvin Yarborough, and what I learned from this record, Priscilla Shaw. So that led me to know where to research her, and she did indeed turn out to have been owned by Shaws. Remember that spelling doesn't count in genealogy, so it doesn't matter that his name is not spelled B-O-R-O-U-G-H, which is what we came forward with. It's him. And it tells that they were lately slaves but now emancipated. I first saw this record and took this picture right here in this building in 2007 before any of this was online. It's all online now. And this is the day that I sat in the table up in the reading room and found out that Calvin actually had been enslaved. I was still trying to find documentation of that, and I had been researching for like 13 years at that time. So I cried at the table, but then I also kind of celebrated because now I had some answers. But anyway, I wanted to show you that handwritten one, but here are Everett and Minerva, who you met on the 1870 census, third great-grandparents, also lately slaves but now emancipated, and they had been together as man and wife for almost 20 years, December of 1846. Oh, for Calvin and Priscilla, they had been together since December 27th of 1860. So you'll see them in different formats. They all mean the same thing, okay? Records of the Freedmen's Bureau also are going to be post-emancipation, although there are a few locations that do have some pre-emancipation records. So just check for your area, because I actually found some in North Carolina a couple of weeks ago, and normally we don't say that there are pre-emancipation records in North Carolina, but there were. I did run into a couple. Family Search and Ancestry both have all these records, and they're free for you to access whether you are a paid member of Ancestry or not. This Freedmen's Bureau was established in March of 1865 as the Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands. And I'm not going to read them, but these are all a lot of the different types of record sets that you will find. Feel free to take a picture of this slide if you want to, because I normally read it. But I need you to know these are not all of the kinds of records you will find. It would take probably a full day for me to tell you all the different kinds of records you will find. But if you find your ancestors in a Freedmen's Bureau record, there's a chance that it will name the former enslaver. You also will see the first surname that they're using after emancipation. It might be different from the one you see in 1870 for the reason I've already told you. But it all will help you with your research. So this is an example of a Freedmen's Bureau document. This is a letter that was written to request transportation for George Givens, his wife Peggy, and their 3 children who were under 14 years old to get taken from this city, Raleigh, North Carolina, it's up at the top here, to King George County, Virginia, where they were from. But they were sold away from the home of their childhood just before the close of the war. So now you know, if these are your ancestors, that even though, well, let me finish this. If you can get them back to King George County, they'll be among friends and relations who will give them land, a place to live on, and assist them in otherwise obtaining a livelihood. That was the goal always. Get them away from a place where they're going to have to be dependent on the government. So they get them back they can be with their family, and they're not the problem of Wake County anymore. That's how it worked in all of these things. But if you're researching them, you may have never known that they ever spent time in Raleigh because maybe your family is all in King George, North Carolina. Now, I don't know when they got married. I don't know any of it. Well, it does say that it was just before the war. But let's say this was a single man. And let's say that you can't figure out why all your DNA matches are having a connection to Raleigh, North Carolina, because your people were from King George, Virginia. But that man spent some time in Raleigh, North Carolina, and probably was not celibate either by choice or not by choice. So he left something in Raleigh, North Carolina, and then those people left descendants in Raleigh, North Carolina, and now you found a document that will explain to you why you have DNA connections in and around Raleigh, North Carolina. Okay, I'm getting on my tangent. Okay, and also this is just an example of a Freedmen's Bureau labor contract. These contracts will spell out what work was to be done, how they will be paid. Like they usually paid them in clothing, food, a small amount of money, and maybe a plot of land that they could work for themselves. And they also sometimes had behavioral expectations for the freedmen that make you wonder if they were really free. So you just have to see how whatever one you're looking at is written. And then everyone signs the contract. So the freedmen on this one, none of them were able to sign their own name, so they all signed with a mark. And then the landowner or property owner also signs, and usually a witness from the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay, the Freedmen's Bank, totally different from the Bureau, but also established in March of 1865 by an act of Congress. This is how the application pages will look if you were physically flipping through the book or flipping through it online. There will be 4 applications to a page. Notice that 3 of them look like they have a lot of information, but this one doesn't have anything except one word, white. So yes, white people could have accounts with the Freedmen's Bureau, but they did not ask them any of the questions that they asked black people when they set up their accounts. And that's just fine for those of us doing research, because those of us doing research are getting a lot of information like this. This one for David Humphreys, he's up there in the bottom left corner. He came in on March 30th, 1870. It tells where he was born, where he was brought up, where he lives now, how old he thinks he is, 44 or 45, his complexion with a description about a scar that he has, his occupation, who he works for, which is himself, his wife's name with her maiden name. He doesn't have any children by her. His son's name by a different natural mother who lives in Onslow County, lots of information. His father's name, and he tells that his father was carried away to Alabama when he was a small boy. His mother's name, his brother's names, his sister's names, the fact that one of them was dead before he was born, and he signs with an X. That's 30 years of research handed to you on one document. There's stuff on there I don't know about my ancestors as long as I've been researching. So that's a blessing. This one, I just wanted you to know that women also had accounts with the Freedmen's Bureau. This is Caroline Williams. You get the same information. She lives with William Whitford. She's 23 years old. Her occupation is nurse. She works for William Whitford. She's a live-in nurse. Now, you might find out that you're a Whitford. You never know, but that's a great hint. She gives her father's name, her mother's name, her brother's name, he's a blacksmith, her sister's names, and she signs her own name. And the last one, Samuel Blackman. I had to show you this one. I had to show you all of them for different reasons. From Charlotte, North Carolina, but brought up in Wilmington. So something happened there. And his residence is on an alley near 4th and Orange Streets. He lives in the alley. He's light-skinned. He sells rags and things. That's his occupation. He works for himself. He is 9 years old. I just wonder how he did in life, you know. he's already an entrepreneur at 9 years old. He gives his mother's, father's names, his brother's name, and says he has no sisters. Okay, and then the last thing for the Reconstruction era records is last seen. Last Seen is a website that you can find at informationwanted.org, and this was an effort that was made after emancipation for family members who had been separated from one another to find their family members again. So the black newspapers published these ads, and every week they asked that pastors read them in church, because remember, most of our population was probably still illiterate at that time. Not only did they ask the pastors to read them, but any subscribers in your community were asked to gather people and read them out loud to their neighbors and friends. So really quickly, this one says, Mr. Editor, I desire to inquire for my mother, if possible, to find out about her whereabouts. Her name is Melinda Gill. We were separated in 1843 in Wake County, North Carolina. When I was about 2 or 3 years old, we belonged to Colonel Otis, is how I'm pronouncing it, who was my father. You see this genealogy? He sold us to Israel Gill. My mother, being high-tempered, Gill sold her and kept me. Reverend Purefile, which I believe to be James S. Purefoy, who carried her to Roseville, where he kept a hotel. When Israel Gill bought mother from Colonel Otis, we lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. Then Gill moved with me to Texas. How else would you have known all of this? Any information is to be sent to, and he gives the address to send it to. Amazing information in these ads. Now, I've got just a few minutes, although I was told I could go a little bit over. We have to talk about the other part of our ancestry, because not everyone of our ancestors was enslaved. So in 1860, over 10% of African ancestor people in the United States were free. And in North Carolina, that equated to 30,463 people. 8% of North Carolina's full population were free blacks. Now, how did they get free? Well, the status follows the condition of your mother. So if you have a free mother, you're born free. Doesn't matter if mother is white, Native American, black. If she's free, you're born free. Or you could have been previously enslaved and manumitted by your owner. Or you could have self-emancipated, and during the Civil War, you may have self-emancipated and joined the United States colored troops, or you may have self-emancipated behind Union lines and had the opportunity to live in a contraband camp that was sponsored by the Union Army. So those are ways to be free. So now, how do we document these people? Well, first of all, because they're free, they're in the same kinds of records as the white people. So look for them there. Look for court records, business ledgers, estates that we've been talking about, but estates for these black people instead of white people. But we're going to look at just a few record types that are created just for free people of color, just to document them. So remember, I talked about the 1850 and the 1860 census, that all free people would be named. So this big household, this is all one household that you see here in Tyrrell County, North Carolina in 1860, is another set of my third great-grandparents. So Charn and Grace Hill are the parents of all these adult children. I don't know why they haven't left home, living in their house, and you can see their ages, what they're doing for work, and all of that. And the 30-year-old Aggie, again, I'm very fortunate to have another generation, because that's their daughter, Aggie. That's my second great-grandmother. And then her first child, Charles, is my great-grandfather. So I've got 3 generations right there. But they're all free, because they're enumerated by name in 1860. And then back in 1850, there's the household again. Aggie's not living with them. I guess she was elsewhere. But these are those same children who turned out to be still there 10 years later. Okay, so they're free, right? Okay. But were they really free? Now, I have to do this so fast. These are legal restrictions that were put on free people of color in North Carolina. In 1830, whites and free persons of color were stripped of the right to marry. Yes, they could legally marry before that. In 1835, free blacks became disenfranchised by the North Carolina Constitutional Convention. We were the last of the southern states to take away the right to vote from free blacks. In 1836, it became illegal for any slave or free black person to preach in public or even to act as a teacher in any meeting that included slaves. Violation of this section was punishable by 39 lashes. Any free black found to be involved in a slave insurrection in any way would be put to what? Death. In 1861, the right of free blacks to own guns was taken away and county courts were prohibited from granting licenses to free blacks. Laws were passed preventing free blacks from owning or purchasing slaves. Now, remember, we did have black slave owners, and in a tiny percentage of cases, they really were purchasing enslaved people to labor. But most of the time, when you see blacks purchasing other blacks, they are purchasing their family members to get them away from a white enslaver. So they may legally own them, but they're not treating them as though they're enslaved. So that's why it says including the purchase of family members' freedom, because that's mostly what was happening. Laws were passed to limit the rights of property ownership for free blacks in North Carolina. Further restrictions on the practices of manumission and apprenticeships, taxes, and trade were enacted as well. And the establishment of poorhouses in every county, specifically for free people of color, was also mandated. I wish we could talk about it. Now, some of the laws that were created between 1801 and 1833, were specific to anyone who was newly manumitted. So they had been enslaved, but their owner wants to set them free. First, there was an increase on the bond amount to manumit. Yes, they had to pay to free somebody. A lot of people don't know that. A petition was required with 6 weeks public notice that you want to manumit Renata from slavery. And any manumitted slave had to leave the state of North Carolina within 90 days and never return. If they were found to have returned, they would be jailed and re-enslaved. So is freedom really, really free? You have to consider that as you're looking at this population. In other states, there were very formally kept booklets in the courthouse or at the Register of Deeds showing registrations of free blacks, showing that they paid their registration fee and that they had been given their free papers. These are a little more scant in North Carolina. There doesn't seem to be the same statewide push for this. I'm actually in discussion now with Warren Miltier, who wrote the book Free People of Color in North Carolina, to see if we can definitively say that these did not I can't think of my words, exist for North Carolina in all counties, but can't say it yet. But what I have here is a registration that I did find for one North Carolina person in Pasquotank County, North Carolina, and it's for Timothy Spellman, the son of Sally Spellman, so there's genealogy right there, and he's certifying that Timothy is a free person of color of the age of about 50 years, about 5 feet 9 or 10 inches high, a very dark complexion, has a scar on his left hand near the wrist, and has holes in both his ears, and that he's entitled to each and all the rights and privileges of a free person of color, agreeable to the laws of this state. And so this is, again, more prominent in other states, but maybe if you hear me talk again in a couple of months, I'll have a more definitive answer. I don't find a lot of these in my research for North Carolina, but you should look for them. I'm just going to say many people had to petition to remain in the state. If they did get manumitted and they were supposed to leave in 90 days, you will find petitions, particularly on Digital Library for DLAS. Digital Library, I'll tell you in a minute. I'm losing my brain. Okay, you look for these petitions to remain, and you also look for petitions, Digital Library on American Slavery, and also look for requests for manumission. Apprenticeships are huge in the free black community because North Carolina had laws about who had to be apprentice. So North Carolina provided for binding out apprentices all free base-born, that's illegitimate children, including those of color. All minor children whose fathers deserted their families and have been absent for 1 year. All orphans whose estates were so small that they would not cover the child's education and maintenance. Any child for whom application was made to the wardens of the poor. And the law also provided for apprenticeship of all free Negroes and mulattoes where the parents of such children were not gainfully employed, which is subjective for, the officials of the county to determine if you're gainfully employed. And for that reason, we find many of our free people of color, we find many of those children as apprentices. Now, just quickly, this is some of the different ways that you can see information about apprentices. On the Tyrrell County Gym website, we have a member who has taken the time to transcribe and chart all of the apprenticeships that were done in Tyrrell County. And years ago, I found this, and I found my Charn Hill right here. That's who you just saw, the head of household in 1850 and 60. But this is when he was 6 years old in 1800. And he was apprenticed to a man named Laban Heyman, who died 7 years later, and then he got another one, and I have a lot to say about that, but I can't. And I also discovered that he had a sister, and I discovered this through the apprentice records. His sister Morning, who also was apprenticed on that same date. You will find them in handwritten documents like this, not transcribed. And I like to mention that apprentices, they also had runaway ads for them. But notice that the reward is only 6 cents because the investment has not been made that you make when you have a runaway slave or enslaved person. Okay, bastardy bonds. We're getting really close. Bastardy bonds also is another place you will find free people of color, but this is not a free people of color record set. They're white people, there are all kinds of people in these bonds. So the purpose of the bastardy bond was to place responsibility for support of an illegitimate child upon the father in case the mother could or became unable to provide proper support. Otherwise, the child would become a ward of a county. And remember, we don't want that. We don't want the government to have to take care of anybody. So many free women of color can be found in these records, either with white men or black men named as the father of or the reputed father of their children. This is an example of a bastardy bond. It shows that Alcee Bonham, and this is the state versus Owen Bonham from New Hanover County. Alcee Bonham, she's a single woman, and she's big with child. That's often how it was stated. And that Owen Bonham begot said child upon her. That's a nice way to put it. And the reason these are great is not only because of that kind of record, but there's a series of records that are generated with bastardy bonds. So first, the pregnancy gets made known to the court. That's what that was. Then a warrant is issued to bring the woman into the court so she can be questioned under oath and asked to declare the name of the father. And then the reputed father was served a warrant, and he had to post bond. All of these are documents. And if the woman refused to name the father, she or some other interested party would post the bond. Sometimes the mother and father posted the bond together. If the woman refused to post the bond or declare the father, she was often sent to jail. Church records, again, for free people of color, just like our enslaved ancestors. Here's Mary Green, a free woman of color, coming forward, relating her experience and received as a candidate for baptism. This is, this was from Tanners Creek it's right there, Tanners, in Warren County. Newspapers, again, for free people of color, but for different reasons, like every reason imaginable. But I found this, I changed out my samples on this the other day when I found this one because I thought it was so interesting. So this is these are two things that are put together in one article, so to speak, from the Wilmington Journal. And the first one says George Sampson's a free man of color who was convicted of larceny the day before yesterday, in that he entered the store of one Laughlin and stole therefore 53 cents, received 39 lashes on his bare back yesterday. But following that, so that's my AI depiction of George Sampson's. And following that, we are requested to state on behalf of George Sampson, a free man of color in this place, son of James Sampson, carpenter, that he is not the person referred to who is, we believe, originally from Fayetteville. James Sampson is well known here as a very worthy man, and his family enjoy the same character. The person referred to up here is no relative, and that's my AI depiction of George Sampson. So I thought that was kind of funny, but anyway, okay. Also, you can seek early military records. Please know that our ancestors of color have been involved in every conflict in this country since the Revolutionary War. I have black and white Revolutionary War ancestors. So you want to look for their service record, their military records, their bounty records, anything connected to that particular conflict that was created. You'll find our ancestors of color in it, as well as coming forward, the Civil War. You want to really study the records of United States colored troops. You want to look for service records. You want to look for pension files, all of the above. And then a lot of additional military documentation can be found in books, in dissertations, and even, we don't usually think about our black ancestors with the Confederacy, but there's a record set called Confederate Army Slave Payrolls, because our enslaved ancestors were doing work for the Confederacy, but their owners were being paid for it. So they were just being hired out to be cooks, to be laundresses, to build fortifications, to do all the things that they didn't want to do for themselves. And then slave narratives can never be forgotten. Most of us know about the WPA slave narratives, but there are many other types of slave narratives, including books that formerly enslaved people wrote themselves. So these are going to give you information not just about that person, but about their family, about the enslaver's family. I really encourage whites to read these, because you'll find out stuff about your own family that maybe you didn't know, and also references to historical events that happened during the time of the person's life. We're not going to read this. Please go back to the video and read a little bit of the information given by Henry Bobbitt, who was enslaved in North Carolina. Just a few North Carolina-specific resources. I already mentioned Digital Library on American Slavery for the petitions and whatnot. Digital North Carolina, which is a partnership, started out of UNC Chapel Hill, but it involves the State Library, it involves Duke University, and all the other repositories that have manuscript collections related to slavery. And the From Naming to Knowing project, which identifies people who worked to build the state capitol just across the street and diagonally from here, has our ancestors' names on it, and they're trying to create biographies for those workers. And the last thing is and I'm telling you, I took about 15 slides out of here, but the last thing is to make connections. As you're doing this research, you're going to find you're connected to people you didn't know before, and they may be descendants of enslavers who enslaved your family, or other people who I call location kin, whose families maybe have lived near your family, in the same county, been enslaved on the same plantation or by the same person, and you guys can work together to share records and do the research. This is more valuable than I can express to you right now. But when you're working with and reaching out to these people, just remember to withhold any judgment, because these are not the people that enslaved our ancestors. And many of them are willing to help, and many of them, like my cousin Betsy, who lives in the one and only house that you will see when you stand on those steps and look at the parking lot, because there used to be a neighborhood where that parking lot is, and her family fought to keep the house because it had historical significance with Sherman coming and shaking hands with somebody by the window or something like that. But their house is still there, and that's part of my white family. And we've been working together for years. So make that happen. The person you see me here with is a descendant of the Yarborough family who last enslaved my great-grandfather. He had 4 different enslavers. And we met years ago, and it's a long story for everything I have, but I can't tell you. So just to recap, when you're researching ancestors of color, begin with what you know, names, dates, places, whatever. Begin to build a tree or a pedigree chart. Obtain your baseline information from vital records, and then choose your fork in the road for pre-1870 research. Make sense of everything you see, read everything on the page, make sure you do the cluster research and that you study the laws of the time, make connections with descendants and other researchers, create a timeline for your ancestor, which actually ends up helping you to write the story of your ancestor's life. Thank you. I'm sorry I went a little bit over. These are ways that you can reach me. I need to take the Twitter one down. I'm still on it, but I don't pay any attention to it. But my email, Facebook, and my blog, feel free to take a picture of this. And then if you would like to scan this QR code, it will take you to my clickable links document that has links to all the places that you can find records like I've talked about, or many of the places. I do want to say I couldn't get on the internet today, so this is not the most updated version. This version is probably about 6 or 7 months old. But if you email me, I'll send you the updated version, which is only slightly different from the version you're going to get here. And again, thank you, and thank you to the committee that put this wonderful event together. Thanks. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Renata, for that. That was all fantastic. I'll switch it out.
Did you all get that? Okay.
All right. There we go. There you go.
You can unplug it. I can
Okay.
take that.
All right.
Go ahead. I'll just get it.
I'll collect it when I get it. I'll step down. Okay.
Just the phone in it.
Yeah. There you go. This is yours. All right. Thanks again. No problem. There you go. All right. Yeah. While we transition here to the next presentation, just in the interest of time, we're going to dive right into it, and it is, here we go. Wonderful. Okay. All right. So next up we have Joyce Sharrock Cole. And she is the village historian of Ossining, New York, and an award-winning genealogist certified in genealogical research by Boston University. She specializes in African American and local history using research, storytelling, and public programs to preserve community heritage and uncover stories that often have been overlooked. So with that, Joyce.
Good morning, everyone. So, thank you. When I started my research, I knew absolutely nothing. I knew my grandparents' names. I met my grandfather. He died when I was 3, and that's it. So don't be discouraged from starting at a very short place of not knowing much. And I'm going to show you how I evolved into being a very proud descendant of some wonderful people. My presentation is entitled, "My Surname is Not My Bloodline." Now, Sharrock. I'm going to tell you what I thought about Sharrock. Sharrock sounds Irish to me. It sounds like Shamrock, and I was very invested in this. As a child, we are always trying to find connections, right? We want to know where we fit, where do we fit in the grander context of American history. We're doing all those things, so I wanted to do that as well. I wanted to connect to something. And no one in my family can tell me about the Sharrocks. So I made it up in my head. I was a very creative child. So what I knew was what my family looked like. I'm dark-skinned for my family. My mother is very fair. My aunt has strawberry blonde hair. My mom has freckles. Everyone is light. So we are part white. That's what I thought. So I thought the Sharrock name was Irish in origin. I believe that the Sharrock, the person that owned my family in enslavement, was of Irish descent, and some forced relationship happened, hence my mother and how everyone looked in my family. Remember, I'm making this up because no one can tell me. Now, we were certain that the Sharrock was because of the enslaver during the antebellum South. Now, I want you to understand how into this Irish I was. I had a fighting Irish jacket, Notre Dame. On St. Patrick's Day, I was the first one with the Kiss Me, I'm Irish shirt. My corned beef and cabbage was going. My husband is sick of it. There's a lot of corned beef and cabbage going. I just wanted to connect. I had a clotter ring, everything. And then I started researching. I wanted to know more. And when I'm telling you I'm researching, I am thinking that for 40 years of my life. No one can tell me anything. So I Googled. I'm Googling Sharrock, and I'm just finding this white man, and I'm like, well, maybe that's him. Maybe that's my grandfather. And it kept taking me to Hope Plantation in Bertie County, North Carolina. So I decided the only way I'm going to get help is to open my mouth. So I called. I called down, and I said, okay, you're going to think I'm crazy. But I'm black, and I'm seeing this white man, and he's a Sharrock, but I think I'm related to him. Can you help me? And I was just waiting for the woman to just hang up. But she says, I know exactly who you need to talk to, Gregory Tyler. And she's sitting here today. And I've been holding on to Gregory for many, many, many years. So when I talked to her, I said, okay, she says, we've been looking for you. I said, you've been looking for me? She said, yes, I have everything you need to get started. And she had all these documents about the Sharrock. And then she ruined my life, and I'm going to tell you why. The name's not even Irish. I had to get rid of all that stuff, y'all. I don't have a fighting Notre Dame jacket anymore. St. Patrick's Day is not the same. It's Irish, it's English. So now I'm tea and crumpets. I'm Bridgerton all the way. I was arguing with my husband about my tea this morning. So I can hold on to that. So I'm going to tell you why that's even ruining my life, but I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. So I started researching. I had the gift of Gregory. So I had a lot of stuff to start me off. It was receipts and censuses. Already looked, she did a lot of the work for me. But we just talked about, Renata talked about the 1870 wall. So when I tried to go and research myself, this is before going to school for it, I'm like, I don't see anybody past 1870, what's going on? You have to relearn American history in order to do this. We were not educated properly, at least I know we were not in the North. I'm from New York. Slavery is just, hey, you were enslaved, and okay, let's talk about something else. That's not what they want to talk about. I did not understand the nuances of slavery enough to even attack this research in an effective way. I just did not. And I'm not going to go over this too much because you were just taught about it. The first document that changed my life, January 1st, 1829. And this was in the documents that Gregory gave me. And I'm going to read it to you. And then I'm going to give you a quiz, so get ready. You got a pen? I'm not going to ask you to answer me, but I want you to listen to the document, and I want you to pick up on things that I'm saying, because I want you to start looking at documents in a critical way, that you're just not looking surface-wise. You are really examining what you were told. Now, I'm going to be honest. When you find an ancestor in a document, you get very excited. I actually run through my house. Anytime I do, my husband looks, he's like, what did you find now? I'm literally running. I found him. He's like, who'd you find now? So get ready for your test. On January 1st, 1829, 3 siblings, Simon, Edith, and Isham, are sold by Thomas Early to Mary Sharrock for $550. The receipt of their sale reads as follows. Thomas Early of Hopkins County and State of Kentucky, for and in consideration of the sum of $550 paid by Mary Sharrock of the County of Bertie and State of North Carolina for the receipt, State of North Carolina, the receipt whereof is hereby acknowledged, and himself therewith fully satisfied, hath bargained and sold, delivered unto the said Mary Sharrock, the 3 Negroes, 1 boy by the name of Simon, about 11 years of age, and 1 girl by the name of Edith, about 7 of age, and 1 boy, about 3 years of age, by the name of Isham, is to have and to hold the said Negroes, Simon the elder, Edith and Isham, to the fair Mary Sharrock and her heirs forever. As signed, sealed, and delivered in the presence of Whitmell T. Sharrock, State of North Carolina, Bertie County Court, February term, 1829. This bill of sale from Thomas Early to Mary Sharrock was acknowledged in open court by the said Early and ordered to be registered. Did you write down what you found out? So this is the receipt of sale. Remember, when I was making up things in my head about being Irish, I thought the entire time of enslavement, my last name was Sharrock. I found out that my family became Sharrock on January 1st, 1829. What else did I find out? My last name was also Early. Yes. What else did I find out? 3 children. And their names. And what else? And their ages. And Kentucky's in there. And if I subtract, I have years of birth. You can look, how many of you watch a movie and it's good? You watch it 4, 5, 7, that's me, 8 times. And each time you watch it, you found something different. That's you in these documents. Read it today, put it down, go back next week, read it again. Wait a month, read it again. Because we all think we're smart and you read it the first time, you're like, ain't nothing in there. And you're gonna go back in a month, you're like, how did I miss that? I want you to pay attention to this house, because it's gonna come up again. You see this house? Okay. This is the receipt of sale. And what did this teach me? 1, that I had really good cardio at the time I started, because I'm running through the house. Because every time either I'm calling Gregory and something else and I'm crying, and this is real like nasty crying with I needed tissues and everything. So I'm so excited for a little girl that only knew her grandparents' name that now I'm getting back further. And now I'm starting to feel a lot more connected. And I'm feeling a lot more connected to the point where I want to learn about the history of this country a little more, because I see myself in it. So I'm relearning American history all over again. We're taught about enslavement, that the transaction was, and if you were in school, you saw somebody up on an auction block, they're turning around, they're measuring their value, selling it, and that's it. That's what we were taught, at least in school where I was. But now I'm noticing through documents, the transfer of ownership is they're inherited, they're purchased, their collateral, their loans, they're being transferred. Slaves are being recorded in wills, deeds, tax records, personal papers, and everything is different. It's not what I thought. And what you just learned, I've traced a family that the wife was a free person of color, but she purchased her husband to keep him out of enslavement, and she sent out the kids to work to pay off the bill. Everything was different. Now, claiming the surname. So remember I told you, I thought I was Sharrock all my life. I thought I was Irish. That didn't work. Then I thought I was part of the Sharrock family. Now I'm finding out about early. I don't know what's going on. So now I need to reach more. So we're going to talk about how the names are claimed. And how, first of all, I didn't know they were claimed. When our families were emancipated or self-emancipated, we had a choice. For the very first time, they were able to have agency over their lives, over their families. And they were able to take on a name, whether they made it up, it was the last enslaver. For my family, it was the last enslaver. We kept Sharrock, although they say down here, Sharrock. And you'll know which one of the Sharrocks are where they're from, if they went north or they stayed south, because the southern Sharrocks are Sharrock, and we're up in Newark, we're Sharrock. And we argue on the phone all the time. We're on the phone, hey, Miss Sharrock. It's not Sharrock, it's Sharrock. No, it's not, it's Sharrock. That's how we say it, so we argue about it in love. So the last name of the last enslaver is what my family did, but that's not what everyone does. It could be of a previous enslaver. I see that in the records from my family where they flip-flopped between a past enslaver and not the one that was directly after emancipation. The interchanging of names until one sticks, and I'll show you that example in my family. So it would have sometimes been occupation. How many carpenters do you know? How many blacksmiths do you know? The presidents, Jackson, Jefferson, Lincoln, you'll see all of that coming up. Washington, occupation or skills, a place of residence, a color, you never know, or something that has nothing to do with the person. I did a genealogy on a person, and we found out that the grandfather went by Diaz. They're black. He said it was much easier for him to live as a Hispanic man than a black. Had nothing to do with his bloodline. Do you get what I'm saying now? So this is Freeland Sharrock, cohabitation record that we have in my family. Freeland Sharrock and Margaret Sharrock, these are my third great-grandparents, are living as husband and wife with the name Sharrock. They're both Sharrock. They were not related, and that did happen sometimes. Cousins might be with cousins, so you might be double related to people. It's just the way it was, y'all. Don't get distressed. Don't get upset when you're doing it. It's just the way it was. But they were not. But they were cohabitating as husband and wife, and this is 1866 for 3 years. But my second great-grandfather, her son, was not Freeland's child. Now, you got to remember, nuclear families are different between black and white at that time. We did not have a nuclear family. We were not a family unless by the permission of the enslaver that they recognized the marriages and the family, but we could not go into legal contracts. A marriage is a contract. We were not allowed to marry. But we could slave marry, which jump over a broom, have a ceremony privately, but your security as a family was as secure as their assets. If they needed to sell something off, if a daughter, in this case happened, the man that enslaved my family had all daughters, they married. If they inherited one of the enslaved or he wanted to give a gift, they're gone. And that happened with Margaret. Margaret's first husband, or slave husband, Charles, went away with one of the daughters, and he became Gil. Now, you'll see Freeland again in the 1870, so it wasn't 70, we learned that, census that they decided to be Watson. That was another family, and I'll tell you about that later. So they're living together as Watson, and then Jacob is my grandfather, if you see him down there. He was 14. I'm looking at this. I did not know past my grandparents. I am looking at people in the 1800s. You could not pay me as a child to believe this. So they went back and forth. It was like they wanted to see what stick. Oh, maybe I'll do Watson today. No, maybe I'll do this decade. I don't like the way that sounds. I'm going to do Sharrock. And they stuck with Sharrock. I wanted to share with you a slave narrative about how names were picked from the slave narrative. And it says, the master's name was usually adopted by a slave after he was set free. This was done more because it was the logical thing to do and the easiest way to be identified than it was through affection for the master. Also, the government seemed to be in an almighty hurry to have us get names. And this is Martin Jackson saying this. Well, I got to thinking about all those slaves that was gonna take the name Fitzpatrick, and I made up my mind, I'm gonna find me a different one. And one of my grandfathers in Africa was called JCO, and so I decided to be Jackson. I love that they just made whatever they want. And to me, it wasn't making up whatever they wanted. They decided who they wanted to be at that very second and said, my bloodline from here is going to be what I determine. So for me, it's a point of pride. So the bloodline started for them at that very moment for his descendants. That's what he determined, that was their bloodline was going to be attached to that name. So maybe it doesn't go back centuries and centuries for their bloodline, but it started when he said, and he was the head of their family at that moment. So this is what I found out through the research and the help of Gregory and my names. We were Boone from the early 1700s to the 1800s, then early for 90 years. So when I looked at that receipt, to me, it looks in that receipt that it might have been early for just a transaction. 90 years is someone's lifetime. We were early for 90 years, and then Jenkins for 5. And then at one time, we were Sharrock, Outlaw, Watson, Gill, and Bazemore as people got sold off or transferred over, or the daughters were willed away. So who are the Sharrocks? This is Whitmel Sharrock. To see the person that enslaved my family for the first time was surreal. And I told my mother, it's actually a funny story. Remember I told my mother is very fair-skinned. I called and said, Mom, I have a picture of the man that enslaved our family. And she's like, you gotta be kidding me. And she hangs up. So I thought she was really angry with me. My mother lives down the street, and I hear a knock at the door. And I was like, what are you doing here? She said, I came to see if I look like him. And she really was examining this picture to see if she looked like him. And she starts making up this wild story. I have his eyes. I can't believe this. And she's going on and on and on. So remember, I told you it ruined my life. So I thought I was Irish. That didn't work out. I attached now to Bridgerton, but this is before Bridgerton when I found out my tea and crumpets, and now I'm all things British. I have British box, everything. I stream everything. And so she comes up and she's like, oh, I look like him. So for a long time, I thought that that was it. And so I said, I have to come meet Gregory, who's down here in Raleigh, and I need to go where these documents are that she found. And she found them right here in this building. So I had never been this south before I came to visit Gregory. I thought we were the only family that was not enslaved in the South because no one in my family knew anything. My mother knew her grandparents' names, that's it. We lived in the town that we live in for 125 years. They knew nothing. I was like, so we must have just been here in New York. And by the way, in New York, you're not told that enslavement was in New York as well. In school, they skirt right over that. So we just thought that we were just free as a bird up in New York. And that was not the case. We were here down south. So I wanted to go. And learning your history is very important because you will fall for anything if you don't understand for yourself. I was petrified to come down south. I was told, you're going to get hurt. They hate black people. You're going to die. And I called Gregory. I was like, is it going to be okay? She's like, you're going to be fine. Come on. And I came down here, and I was pleasantly surprised. Everybody was so nice. I had so much help. And I came to archives, and for the first time, I touched what my ancestors touched. These documents that Gregory had scanned and sent to me were so different. Now, although it looks like a corroded mess, that holds the key to my family. Inside of this, Whitmill had a store on his land, and he kept impeccable records. And this book was from his store. And he kept the records of what every enslaved person purchased in his store. And I got to know my relatives by their shopping habits. So now when I tell my husband I'm going shopping, I just inherited that trait from my ancestors that was shopping at Whitmill's store. Some things just passed down from generation to generation. Not only that, you heard about the working papers, the Freedmen's Bureau, and the work agreements. Inside those documents was my family's work agreement after emancipation, and they're calling them by name. And I'm seeing one, if you look at this document, you notice first are the terms, how much they're being paid, or if they're given something. It was barrels of corn, some were getting a couple of dollars, and then I see all the names coming down the line, Simon and Nate and all of these people, and you notice what's on the side. Are they signing their name? What am I learning? They couldn't read or write. And then I start to think, because remember, you're supposed to critically. Now, it says Whitmill, and then you have the name of the witness. But before I knew there was a witness from the Freedmen's Bureau, I didn't understand that. And remember, I'm looking in the beginning, not critically. And I'm like, so did he rip them off? How did they know what he said is what he wrote down? And you're thinking of all these things and the circumstances that your family is in. And when you start looking at them back then, you think about how you operate today. And I'm like, do I read my contracts well? Am I advocating for myself because I can now and they couldn't? And it makes you think back then and today. But they signed their names, and now I have my aunt's name, my uncle's name, and I'm just feeling really good that I can trace them and see what they were doing, and at this very moment that now they're being paid. Now, what I did find out about Whitmill in a book about northeastern North Carolina is Whitmill Sharrock, although he was an enslaver, was that he was pretty fair for what the institution was. Now, I know that sounds weird coming from me, a descendant of enslaved people, but I want to understand all of it. And as you were told just before, you have to go in with an open heart. You have to go in just ready to learn, but whatever you hear. And we're seeing it through records that when they were able to leave the plantation they were on and go to wherever they wanted to post-emancipation, a lot of people were trying to go work for Whitmill. So it was starting to make sense to me that maybe he was a little fair for what the institution was. And then when I found the other side of my Sharrocks that were down here, is we were naming people in our family after him. So the argument that he might have been fair for what the institution was may have some value because it makes sense. Why are people fleeing to him? And why are we naming people after him? So my third great grandmother. Inside the book, remember, I can see what they're purchasing. Now, Grandma liked to have tobacco and whiskey on Fridays. I didn't pick that one up, babe. But for people that I never knew, these documents always make me cry because for one moment, I feel like I'm with them. Every Friday, I know she's getting her whiskey and her gin. Every week, I know that she went and bought my great-great-great-grandfather a book and a hat. And then for one moment when I was here, I'm touching the book that Whitmill wrote in about my ancestor at the very time they were standing in his presence. And it made me feel close to them. So when you are researching and you find a document, and even if you're blessed to have a Gregory, or you find it on your own, you feel very connected at that moment to the person that made you possible, and that's a win. So I'm researching, and for the most part, you never get a picture of your ancestor in my research. My family was horrible at keeping pictures. There was a lot of fires going on, a lot of moving. So I'm researching, and I found it when I did my ancestry tree. Now, because I have this document, I have traced and found a lot of people. There are branches on and on and on. So I found a cousin, and she was from a branch, and she's talking to me. She says, I have this picture on my wall, and I just don't know who this man is. And my father said it's my grandfather. And then I did that thing again. I started running back and forth. And he's like, who did you find? And I said, are you kidding me? If you're on the branch of Jacob's sons, and she's the last living of the branch below him. And she says, yeah. I said, you just found our grandfather that I've been looking at in pictures, in documents, that he got a hat when he was a little boy, that he worked, and I see his in the work agreement when he was getting paid. And you mean to tell me I'm going to be able to see him? And she said, yeah. So she sent me the picture. And for the first time, I saw me in him. And this is Grandpa Jacob. Now, that was exciting for me, but my mom and them were really scared and freaked out. They're like, I don't want to look at that ghost anymore. I said, that ghost is your grandfather. But he ended up on shirts. He's on the website for our family. He is everywhere. He's on, my husband's like, oh, is that Grandpa Jacob again? He's everywhere. Because I didn't even know he existed. And not only did I not know he existed, me doing this research had put me on cemetery boards. I'm digging up everything. I came down here, Gregory had me on this pilgrimage into, I'd never been down here, y'all. Y'all got snakes. Y'all have a lot of woods. I said, Gregory, where are we going? We're going behind this house. There might be a cemetery. I said, excuse me? And so we're digging in the ground. She said, he might be under here. What? But we were finding my family. I was walking on the soil that my family was on. Their tears, their sweat, their contribution to this country was in that soil. So I dug some of it up and brought it with me. But it made me go home and get on cemetery boards. We don't have all them snakes. But I went to the local cemetery where some of my family was, and I knew some of my family was there. I knew about 10 of them were there. But when I got there and I went to the house, now I'm a genealogist, and I'm thinking I'm going into the house that maintains the cemetery. I said, I need to find every Sharrock you have here. You probably have 10. He said, you're wrong. We have 86. I have 86 family members in that cemetery. And I went and got little Sharrock flags I made, and I'm sticking them everywhere. I learned it from Gregory. I'm digging, and they told me your grandfather, Jacob, is here. I said, excuse me? He came up when they left Bertie County in 1923. He came with the family. They did not have a TV. His son, my great-great-grandfather, had 21 kids. There was no TV, y'all. They were just spending time together. He had two wives, and he was working them. One died off, and she probably just because she just kept having kids. And then he had another, my grandma Nellie. And they came up to Ossining, where they stayed, and they brought Grandpa Jacob. Grandpa Jacob died in Ossining only 3 years after being there. But we went and literally digged him up in the cemetery. His stone had recessed into the ground. And the gentleman says, oh, your grandfather's right here. I said, where, sir? I don't see it. He said, he probably recessed into the ground. I'll go get a shovel. I said, for what? So he said, you want to see him, right? I said, no. So he said, we're gonna dig him up. And I said, well, I got to do it. I have to see it. I physically have to see that he's here with us. My formerly enslaved ancestor came to Ossining, where I've been the entire time, where the family had been the entire time, and no one knew he existed. So we dug. That man right there, my husband. I point to him a lot because I don't do anything without my husband. He dug for me. He was all over the cemetery looking for my grandfather, and he dug up my grandpa's stone. And when they dug up my grandpa's stone, the gentleman came from the cemetery. He said, I think you want to see this. I said, what? He said, there's 3 more people in there with him. So I found 3 more people, babies, a wife, and now everything is starting to make sense. All these pieces of the puzzle. So when you're looking, I need you to go to the cemetery. We're buried by our family. And he sits at the top of the hill. It's almost a beautiful story. He sits at the top of the hill of the cemetery, and everybody is surrounding him below. He is still the head of the house in the cemetery. So then I'm thinking about my surname. How many of us are thinking about our surname now? Is it really attached to me? And so in that book of things, in my Gregory over here, there was a map. It was a Bertie County map. And in this map was a gorgeous, gorgeous thing. On the Library of Congress, I want you to look up maps. It was a Civil War map. And I'm seeing all these names. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see the names, little ticks? It's all these surnames. And I know they're not of enslaved people, of the enslaved. But I'm looking, I said, I went to school with every single person from the Sharrock down, Cherry, Bazemore. And they're just going on. And I said, I go to school with somebody with that last name. This map busted open a genealogical mystery in my whole community. Every single last name was representative of every single Black family in Ossining. And I then, at that moment, found the migration pattern of my community. And we started a little Bertie County Genealogical Society in our community to get everybody in so they can learn all the stuff I did. And it was all because of this map. And they've all been digging. So look into your maps as well. So then the paper trail started running dry. And I was like, okay, I have all these papers, I have these names, I've been able to follow people through vital documents from the top, from me down, and I'm doing pretty good because I had a Gregory. So this is not something you're gonna do alone. You have the archives, which have private collections that you need to look into, but you need to find people that are seasoned in this already. Most genealogists want to help other people. We wanna share what we know. We want people to feel what we feel, the connection we feel to ourselves. We want you to have that feeling as well. So call somebody, even if you think you sound silly, you don't. You have tables upstairs of genealogical societies. They want to help you. Take the help. So then when it ran dry, I said, I'm gonna do DNA. I said, I'm gonna submit it. My whole family just went crazy. Don't do that. I was like, is everybody a criminal or something? Everybody's like, I don't want my DNA out. And they were losing their mind. So I said, I'm doing it. I need to find out. So if you get caught, just don't do something. So I'm looking at my mom, and my mother, Diane, is on the left. And I only did partial of the segments. And if you look at me on the right, if you see my mother's second, you see how big that European is for my mom? It's not too small for myself. And in her Germanic Germany, you start adding up. By the time I added up my mother's not Black, she was 40% not Black. So I told my mom when she got her results in, the knock at the door came again. I was like, oh, your results in. She hangs up. I think she just likes to see things in person, so she's knocking on the door. How Black am I? I was like, not that Black. So I tell her, And she's like, are you kidding me? I was like, do you see yourself? Did you really think that your numbers are going to be 100? But I wanted to understand where that was coming from, because I don't reject any part of me. I am who I am. And I want to know the parts that I did not know, whether it be white, whether it be indigenous. I want to know all the parts of me, because I did not know for far too long. So then I start finding the cousins list. I don't know if I'm not advocating for anyone to do DNA. That's just what I did. But I always tell people, if you're going to do it, the cousins list on that is so wonderful, because you see the people that are connected, and sometimes you can fill in the gaps of where the paperwork ran dry. This is Patrick Henry Winston Sr., and I connect to a lot of his descendants in DNA. So, he was an enslaver of my family as well. And I don't say he is what he is to me. I say I'm still exploring it. I found my family, well, Gregory, because so you get people that have boots on the ground. Get to know people. So I'm saying go know John in a real personal way. Go become best friends with everybody here, because you want to be able to get someone that has boots on the ground. I have a Gregory who has boots on the ground. I have a Mary Helen that's boots on the ground. And so I want to back up for a second. In calling down and meeting and coming here, I started researching with people that ended up in my DNA. So I researched with the white Sharrocks. By the way, not in my DNA. I'm not related to them. However, he had all girls, and his name died with him and lives through his formerly enslaved. I want you to take that in. We are his legacy. When a man has children, he always wants his name to live on. His name lives on through the descendants of his enslaved. We are his legacy. And we are not bound to him. We have no genealogical title. We have no bloodline to him. We just hold it in name. So hence, my surname's not my bloodline. But Mr. Patrick Henry Winston very well might be, because I am connected to a lot of people in his line. How much time do I have? A little over? Okay, I'm gonna go fast. Okay, so the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, you see the house again, you don't see it yet. So we found papers, well, Gregory's boots on the ground. She found papers that talked about my enslavers in his paper and my enslaved family members. And in the document, they're talking about how my enslaved great-great-great-grandfather was helping them during the Civil War by taking their wealth, burying it in the garden, and planting collard greens on top of it. He's going through enemy lines. I'm finding this incredible story about my family during the Civil War. So now I'm teaching my kids, and when they go to school, they have something to contribute when they're talking about the war. It's now different. This is the house. Remember I told you about the house? This was on the cover of that book I was telling you about, and inside, it's the Sharrock house. So when I came down to meet Gregory, she said, I have a surprise for you. The people that now own that house, because it still stands, are allowing you to go to the house. So there was a picture on the front of it where everybody's standing. So I'm with the white Sharrocks, I'm with myself, and the one thing I did say, just to piggyback off of what you said, Renata, is they looked at me, I looked at them, it was a very awkward moment. And they said, well, I don't know what to say. I said, there's nothing for you to say. Neither of us were there. And the wall broke down, and we just hugged, and we've been cousins ever since. And we're not even related. I'm not even Irish anymore. So, and neither are they. and they're English, and I wasn't. But actually, now you saw my DNA, whoever it was, Mr. Patrick Henry Winston. So I went to this house, and we recreated this picture. And here I am on the porch with the dirt in my hand. My ancestors' sweat, their tears, their joy, their sorrows, and I took it home. So I'm going to reintroduce myself in closing. My name is Joyce Sharrock. Boone, Early, Jenkins, Sharrock, Outlaw, Watson, Gill, Cole. And that's on just one side. So I claim all of them because remember, if you are researching and you are a descendant of formerly enslaved people, you might be attached to many different surnames. But I just want to leave you with saying this. And I had to write it down so I don't cry. My surname is not my bloodline. My bloodline is resilience, survival, and truth. And today, I carry them forward. I invite you to think about your own name. What stories does it hold? And what truths might lie beneath the surface? If you're a descendant of enslaved Africans in this country, your search will be harder, and that's okay. Your search may yield fewer results than mine, but whatever you are is part of who you are. A piece of the puzzle is no longer missing, whatever you find, even if it's one document. As collections become digitized, we are learning more about the people we thought weren't captured in the historical memory. Those people are a part of you, and they're a part of me, and they are no longer missing. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So right now it is just a little bit past 11:30. Let us take a short break and reconvene at 20 till, and then we'll do our last speaker at that point. I want to point out that out this way, so if you got the way you came in and go to the left, there's food, some refreshments, so please go ahead and do that, and we'll be back here at 11:40. Thank you. No, 10 minutes. That's it. Mute it. Isn't that weird? Yeah. Let's go. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Our last speaker today is Desi Campbell, who is a genealogist and historian with over 4 decades of experience. He has traced African-American roots back to the 1700s and West Africa. A passionate storyteller and educator, he is also the publisher of 20 family history books that honor and preserve Black ancestral heritage. And here he is.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank you all for inviting me here today. I am honored to be here. I am honored to speak before you. However, my presentation is not on how to do research. My presentation is on my 5th great-grandmother, and a lot of people of African-American descent cannot go that far back. My 5th great-grandmother was born around 1785, born in Virginia. Parents from Igbo land in Nigeria, who were sold to Cumberland County, North Carolina, in 1793. So my presentation is actually a video, and it's a video story about my 5th great-grandmother. So I'm going to begin to play it. It's about 25 minutes long. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am Desi Campbell, and I am thrilled to have this opportunity to explore a pivotal moment in African American history with you today. As we uncover the tale of Jenny and Joe McLean, it is essential to grasp the intricate impact of slavery, which empowered African Americans to transcend adversity. Join us as we immerse ourselves in the touching narrative of Jenny's ancestors and their descendants, reflecting on their journey and honoring the resilience of our forefathers.
The tale of the McLean and McNeil ancestors unfolds in Ibom, Ohafia, Nigeria, millennia ago. Situated in Igbo land, this region has been a home to the Igbo people for generations. Ibom, Ohafia lies within the state of Abia, one of 5 states comprising Igbo land. Our ancestors resided in Abia in the early 1700s, living in small farming villages, striving for sustenance. Despite the hardships, they found joy in communal gatherings, feasting on staples like yams, beans, and rice, while preserving Igbo traditions passed down through generations. During this era, neighboring villages often clashed in wars, resulting in the capture of prisoners. These captives were then sold by town authorities to European traders, namely the Portuguese and British, who initiated the global slave trade involving the Igbo people and other African tribes. Unfortunately, almost all of their genealogy is verbal, and much of it was lost with the transatlantic slave trade. It's incredible to discover through DNA that you have Igbo ancestry, connecting you to the descendants of Joe and Jenny McLean. Their story, rooted in the Igbo tribe's history, sheds light on the harrowing journey of enslaved Africans from capture to arrival in Virginia around 1775. Jenny McLean's parents, likely captured while working in the fields, endured unimaginable hardships as they were transported to the Cave Temple complex in Arachukwu, Nigeria. From there, they were forced onto brutal slave ships, enduring cramped and unsanitary conditions during the 6 to 8 week journey to Virginia. The Igbo tribe, historically significant in the Richmond area of Virginia, faced tremendous suffering and loss during this period. Jenny's own account on the 1880 census of Harnett County, North Carolina, further emphasizes the enduring legacy of Igbo ancestry and the resilience of those who survived the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. She states that she was born in Virginia and her parents were born in Africa. Jenny's parents' resilience endured beyond the treacherous ocean voyage, as they faced further dehumanization upon arrival in Virginia. Their journey included the degrading experience of being auctioned off on the auction block, subjected to scrutiny and sold to the highest bidder. The fate of their unity remains unknown, whether they remained together or were tragically separated, never to reunite. Despite the challenges, Jenny was born in the Chesapeake Bay area of Virginia around 1785, likely in Richmond, adding another layer to the complex narrative of survival and adaptation in the face of adversity. When Jenny was around 8 years old, she and her parents experienced another harrowing journey. During the 1700s, there was a high demand for slaves in the expanding southern regions, particularly for tasks like cotton and tobacco cultivation and tar production from pine trees. Virginia was a major hub for slave trading, where traders would gather groups of slaves, sometimes numbering as many as 100. These slaves were then transported while shackled or tied together, walking in rows of up to 50, with traders on horseback wielding whips to prevent rebellion and maintain pace. This method, known as a coffle, was commonplace in Virginia and other southern states. Eyewitness accounts of this cruelty were often documented in journals. Jenny and her parents endured this grueling journey, walking approximately 215 miles in extreme heat to Fayetteville, North Carolina, a stop on the way to slave markets in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. The turpentine industry in Cumberland County, North Carolina historically played a significant role in the region's economy. Turpentine, a resin obtained from pine trees, was a crucial ingredient in various products such as varnishes, paints, and medicines. John Sober McLean, who enslaved Jenny, was also involved in the turpentine. Many of the descendants of Joe and Jenny worked on these turpentine farms, laboring in pine forests which provided an abundant source of raw materials for turpentine production. In the 1840 will of Alexander McLean, Joe, Stephen, Celia, Charity, Sandy, and Esther, some of the siblings of Joe or Jenny, were distributed to unknown people. Jenny, at around 15 years old, encountered Joe, also enslaved, and together they bore 14 children. Most of her children went in the name of McNeil because they were passed down and sold to the Archibald McNeil family in Barbecue, Cumberland County, North Carolina. Sarah McNeil, born around 1800, married Sherd McNeil. From this union 14 children were born. Elizabeth, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1815 and she died around 1909. She was found on the Hector McNeil plantation in his 1853 slave inventory. She married Daniel J. Harrington. From this union 15 children were born. This family lived in the Upper Little River Township of Harnett County, North Carolina.
My name is Rayfield Newton. I am the son of Marcella Newton and Prue Newton, Jr. Marcella is the daughter of Joe Jordan and Marcella Harrington. Marcella Jordan is the daughter of Jack Harrington and Amy Johnson. Jack Harrington is the son of Daniel J. Harrington and Elizabeth McNeil. Elizabeth is the daughter of Sharon and Sarah McNeil. Sarah is the daughter of Jenny and Joe McLean.
Diana McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1817. She was found being hired out from Dr. Hector McNeil to Alexander McMillan in 1841. She married Henry B. McLean. From this union 3 children were born. This family lived in the Shawtown community of Harnett County, North Carolina.
Hello, I am Angela J. Poole of Concord, North Carolina. I am a descendant of Joe and Jenny McLean through their daughter, Sarah McLean McNeil. Diana McNeil, the daughter of Sheard and Sarah McNeil, married Henry B. McLean and became the parents of Sandy McLean, who is my great-great-great-grandfather.
William Billy McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1819. He was on the 1853 inventory of Hector McNeil. He married Amy. From this union 16 children were born. This family lived in the Beaver Dam and Riverside townships of Harnett County, North Carolina. Jane McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1820 and never married. She had 2 children, one child by Wiley Holder and one by an unknown father. Jane migrated to Turnback, Lawrence County, Missouri with enslaver Neil McNeil around 1840. At 15 years old, Nelson fled the McNeil farm in Turnback, Missouri, crossing into Kansas. Nelson later connected with Colonel John Ritchie, an abolitionist running the Underground Railroad in Topeka, Kansas, assisting numerous slaves in achieving freedom.
My third great-grandfather, Nelson Holder Ritchie, was a slave, and his mother, Jane McNeil, was a slave in Harnett County, North Carolina. And she was bought by a man by the name of Neil McNeil and taken to Lawrence County, Missouri, when she was 9 months pregnant with my grandfather. She gave birth to Nelson, and then she died shortly thereafter. Jane's mother and father were Sarah and Sherd McNeil, and they were enslaved in North Carolina, in Harnett County also. And then Sarah's parents were Jenny and Joe McLean, and they were also enslaved in Harnett County, North Carolina.
In 1870, at the age of 29, Nelson married Mary Samantha Matthews Fulbright, a young mulatto woman, in Topeka, Kansas. Mary, aged 22, was believed to be the daughter of William D. Fulbright, her former slave owner from Springfield, Missouri. From this union, one child was born. Sometime in 1876, after the death of his first wife Samantha, Nelson traveled to Zion Valley, Kansas, on business, and while there met a beautiful young woman by the name of Annie Cowan Russell, daughter of James Russell and Elizabeth Householder. From this union 12 children were born. Nelson's burial took place in Bountiful, Utah Cemetery, where Annie, his wife, lived for 37 years after his passing, raising their children alone. Annie spent her final years with her daughters, Bessie and Grace, until her death on March 22, 1950, at 93 years old, and was laid to rest beside Nelson. The struggles and hardships endured by Annie, Nelson, and their family are difficult to fathom. Nelson Holder Ritchie's descendants take pride in their heritage and admire the courage he displayed while navigating the hardships of slavery, his collaborating with Colonel Ritchie, and forging his path as an entrepreneur. Sherd, and Hugh McNeil are the children of Sarah and Sherd McNeil. They are the grandchildren of Jenny and Joe McLean. John McNeil's birth is estimated around 1852, with no further available information. Sherd McNeil, born around 1845, passed away on July 21, 1928, in Lillington, Harnett County, North Carolina. He was married to Martha Cavington, and they had 12 children, most of whom reside in the Norrington community in Lillington. Sherd is interred at the Norrington AM.AM Zion Church in Lillington. Hugh McNeil, born around 1861, has no recorded death date. He married Laura Purcell, and they had 3 children, Willie B., Walter, and Carrie McNeil, all born in Maxton, Robeson County, North Carolina. This lineage has maintained a tradition of hosting a family reunion annually for over 50 years.
My name is James Bridges Jr., and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have the honor and the privilege to serve as the current president of the Willie B. and Maggie Fairley McNeil Family Reunion. This year, we'll celebrate our 62nd consecutive family reunion in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. As direct descendants of Joe and Jenny McLean, we are one of the many branches of the McNeil family. Sarah McNeil, my 4th great-grandmother, was the first child of 13 born to Joe and Jenny. Sarah and my 4th great-grandfather, Sherd McNeil, had 13 children also. One of the 13 children was my 3rd great-grandfather, Gabriel McNeil. Gabriel and Caroline McLean were the parents of my 2nd great-grandfather, Hugh McNeil. Hugh was born in 1861, right before the end of slavery in 1865. He married my 2nd great-grandmother, Laura Purcell, and that union produced 3 children, one of which was my great-grandfather, William, or as we know him, Willie B. McNeil. Willie B. and my great-grandmother, Maggie Fairley McNeil, married in Robeson County, and that union produced 10 children: James Cleveland, Willie B., John, Maggie, Lily, Sarah Jane, Palma Lee, Annie Bell, Estella, and my grandmother, Mary Letha McNeil Bridges. And that became what we consider the first generation or the foundation of our branch of the McNeil family. From the parents of Joe and Jenny McLean, who were enslaved people of Igbo lineage from the area now known as Nigeria, we are 10 generations in this country, 6 generations removed from the cruelty of slavery, and still we rise.
Unknown male, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1822 and married Maria McNeil from the Archibald McNeil plantation in Lillington. From this union 14 children were born. This family lived in the Riverside community of Harnett County, North Carolina. Gabriel McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1823 and he married Caroline McLean. From this union 12 children were born. This family lived in the Norrington community of Lillington, Harnett County, North Carolina. Gabriel was later sold to Alabama around 1863 and later migrated to Escambia County, Florida around 1870. He was remarried in Florida and had 6 more children. And his last name was changed to Backus. Stephen McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1823. He was listed on the 1853 Woolen inventory of Hector McNeil. He married a Charlotte. From this union 10 children were born. Most of his descendants live around the Riverside community in Irwin, Harnett County, North Carolina. Charles McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1826. He is listed on the 1854 will of John Red McNeil. He married Jeanette McCoy. From this union 13 children were born. This family lived around the Norrington community in Lillington, Harnett County, North Carolina. Letty McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1830. She was on the 1838 will of Hugh and Sarah McDougall to John McNeil at the age of 11. She married John McLean. From this union 12 children were born. This family lived in the Bunlaville Township of Harnett County, North Carolina. Jerry McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1832. She is listed in the 1854 inventory being hired out to Jeanette McNeil. She was later sold to the Proctor family in Wilson County, North Carolina. She married Abraham Armstrong. From this union 6 children were born. Some of the Armstrong descendants migrated to Lono County, Arkansas after 1880. Hannah McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1833. She married Isaac Cofield from the Zachariah Cofield plantation in Harnett County, NC. From this union 3 children were born. This family lived around the Kipling Township in Harnett County, North Carolina. Dolly McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1835. She married John L. Nelson and was sold to Tennessee and later migrated to Pulaski County, Arkansas. From this union 10 children were born. Sophia McNeil, child of Sarah and Sherd, was born around 1840. She was listed on the Effie Clark 1846 will and was deeded to John McNeil and John McLean. She married Americus Austin. From this union 4 children were born. This family lived in Moore County, North Carolina. Sarah was on the Neil McNeil plantation along with 2 of her siblings, Beth and Judah, and was willed to Hector McLean in 1812. In 1822, several of Sarah's children, siblings, and other relatives were on the inventory list of Archibald McNeil. Dorothy, Jack, Sharper, Dolly, Jude, Young Joe, Cherry, Sandy, Old Joe, Stephen, Celia, Joe, Young George, Mary Ann, Jacob, Jenny, George, Lucy, Neil, Jean, Caroline, Margaret, Eliza, John Robert, Jude, and Peggy. No records have been found on Sherd, however the name Sherd was passed down through several generations within this family line. In 1841, some of Sarah's children were in the will of Mary McNeil, who was the sister of Archibald McNeil. Sarah, Will, Letty, Amy, Emery, Old Bet, Finally, Sarah was found living with her son Charles in the 1880 Harnett County Census in the Upper Little River Township at the age of 80 years old. Beth McNeil, daughter of Joe and Jenny McLean, was born around 1805 and no death date was found on her. She married an unknown Smith, and to this union 5 children were born. No further information was found on this family. Celia McNeil, daughter of Joe and Jenny McLean, was born around 1808 and no death date was found on her. She married Jack McLean. To this union 6 children were born. Some of the descendants of this family migrated to southern Wake County and the others lived in Mount Pisgah area in Irwin. Judah McNeil, daughter of Joe and Jenny McLean, was born around 1807 and she died after 1900. She married Cyrus McLean. According to the 1900 census, she had 9 children and 2 children still living. We are only able to locate one of her children and recently may have found a few more. Judah is buried in the Lillington Star Reformed Free Will Baptist Church in Shawtown, along with some of her descendants. Judah's son Cyrus is also buried in the same cemetery. He lived to the tender age of 96. Tempe Jane McNeil, daughter of Joe and Jenny McLean, was born around 1808 and no death date was found on her. She married Isaac Murchison. From this union 7 children were born. This family lived in the Cedar Grove community in Lillington, North Carolina, and the Flat Branch Township also of Lillington, North Carolina. Tempe was found on the 1850 to 1854 court case papers of deceased enslaver John Red McNeil. Lily McNeil, daughter of Joe and Jenny McLean, was born around 1809 and she died sometime after 1870. She was sold to Neil McNeil and migrated to Lawrence County, Missouri. Most of these descendants live in Wichita County, Kansas. Lily was found on the 1826 inventory of Nancy McNeil, the wife of Archibald McNeil. Millie McLean, daughter of Joe and Jenny, was born around 1810 and she died around 1912. She married George McDougald. To this union 11 children were born. Most of these descendants lived in the Barbecue and Broadway townships of Harnett County. Millie was found on the 1830 will of Catherine McLean given her to Margaret McLean. John Robert McNeil, son of Joe and Jenny McLean, was born around 1812. He met an unknown slave on the Ferguson plantation and to this union 1 child was born. Peter Ferguson. He later met Phoebe Williams and to this union 12 children were born. Some of the descendants lived in the Riverside community in Irwin. John Robert was found on the John Red McNeil, deceased enslaver 1850 to 1854 court case papers. Lucy McNeil, daughter of Joe and Jenny, was born around 1815 and she died after 1880. She was found on the 1821 will of Archibald McLean given her to his son Alexander and Peter McLean. Sometime shortly after that she was sold to Wayne County, Mississippi. She married Richard Chapman of Chesterfield, South Carolina, who was enslaved by William Chapman's family and migrated to Wayne County, Mississippi. In the 1870 census, Lucy is listed in Wayne County, Mississippi, along with her husband Richard and several children. From this union 11 children were born. Son of Joe and Jenny, was born around 1815 and no death date was found on him. He married Monton McDougald. From this union 5 children were born. This family lived in the Barbecue and Broadway Township. Some of the descendants are the Searles family that live in Bunloville community. Simon was found on the 1845 will of John McNeil given him to his son John McNeil. Joe McLean, son of Joe and Jenny, was born around 1816 and he died sometime before 1900. He married Rachel McCormick. She was born in June of 1833 and she died May 24, 1926. She is the daughter of Peter McCormick. They are both buried at the Lovegrove AME Zion Church in Swan Station. Joe was found on the 1821 will of Archibald McLean being given to his son Alexander. From the union of Joe and Rachel 13 children were born. This family started in the Upper Little River Township and they later migrated to the Broadway and Sanford, North Carolina area. George McLean, son of Joe and Jenny, was born around 1818 and he died sometime after 1880. He married Venus Smith. She is the daughter of David Smith. She was found on the Alexander McAllister 1839 will given her to Duncan McNeil and William McIntyre. From the union of George and Venus 3 children were born. This family lived in the Upper Little River Township of Harnett County. George's daughter Martha married Louis Bailey, and this family lived in the Shawtown community in Lillington. James, or Jim, was born in 1819 and he died sometime after 1870. He married Hannah Bailey. From this union 5 children were born. He was sold from David Clark with a bid of $500 by Clark and Effie Clark in 1830. He was later found on the John McNeil Negro hire in 1854. Sharper McNeil, son of Joe and Jenny, was born around 1820 and he died around 1898. He met Charlotte Walker and one child was born, Balaam J. Walker. Sharper later married Zilphia Ray. From this union 9 children were born. John McNeil's will of 1850 listed Zilphia Sharper given to Allen McLean by his father Archibald McLean in 1820. There are over 300 DNA matches to Joe and Jenny McLean. There are 106 matches from Sarah, 67 matches to Elizabeth, 8 matches to Celia, 7 matches to John Robert, 10 matches to Tempe Jane, 2 matches to Lily, 5 matches to Simon, 32 matches to Millie, 9 matches to Joe, 4 matches to George, 4 matches to James, 2 matches to Sharper, and several hundred other unknown matches.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I have a extremely large family. I heard somebody say Jesus when they kept, and I try not to laugh when they kept naming that they were having all those kids. Is Mr. Dobbins in here? Where'd he? So, Mr. Dobbins, you come from Millie. Yes, you come from Millie. All right. So I have a very large family. So every year we get together, we have, well, for the last couple of years, we have what we call DNA Fam Fest. And we have about 100, 150 people that come from all over the country, black and white. And we get together and we meet, and all we do is eat most of the time, most of the day, rather. But this year was different. We went to a plantation. We went to a museum of plantations that's in Harnett County. And so me, not knowing this information growing up, I decided to move to Harnett County and get further into my research. So this is what I came up with. As Renata and the other young lady said about the wills and the deeds, that's how we found most of these people. We were able to reconstruct our family back together again using DNA and using those wills. So we have DNA to just about, we have DNA to all of Joe and Jenny's kids, and we have DNA to all of Sarah and Sherrod's kids. And it's tripled now since we did this video. That was last year. So we have more than 300 DNA matches. We were able to go back to the Igbo tribe in Africa, and we have 263 people have taken the DNA test, and they all have been participated in the Igbo naming ceremony over the last 3 years. And that's it. That's my presentation. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending our sessions this morning into the afternoon. And I think there's maybe a couple more cookies out there if you want to get in on that. Don't forget to do that. Also, mingle with the vendors that are out there. And make your way to Freedom Park to learn about that, learn more from Khadijah. Also, fill out the survey, the event feedback form that you all should have gotten. And then finally, by way of reminder, the building will be closing at 1 p.m., so make sure you have everything you need at that point. Thank you all for coming.